Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a sad privilege to be here with you today. The remarks that I've entitled Jamal Barzinji, Extraordinary Engineer of Human Well-Being. It's only fitting to begin by acknowledging my deep brotherly affection for the man whose achievements are being celebrated today. A sentiment extending to his close friend and associate who devotes himself so fully to the publication and outreach programs of the IIIT in the UK, Europe, and Turkey, Dr. Anas. Acquaintanceship and interaction with both of them have allowed me to gain a richer understanding of Islam, of the difficulties that plagued and still do plague those who wish to pursue a life of faith in their homelands and abroad. And also an understanding of myself and of my culture. After all, it's by learning to understand one another as children of the first human being that we recognize how truly we all are brothers and sisters. This simple truth manifested in the life and works of Jamal Barzinji is equally evident in the accomplishments of his Maslawi counterpart and in the untiring efforts as well as manful sufferings of that political paradigm from Malaysia. While all three bear witness to humanity and committed devotion at their best, the latter two, like me, have been guided by the wisdom and long-range vision of this extraordinary engineer from Kurdish Iraq. If I'm here today to remind you of Dr. Jamal's many praiseworthy activities, it's surely because he always respected and encouraged my interest in the Arabic Islamic culture, especially in the learning of the philosophers within that tradition. He respected it, even though he did not share it. Even more important, though not sharing it, he never tried to stifle it. One anecdote best exemplifies this. Several years ago, I became interested in Ali Abdurrazik's famous Islam wa Usul al-Hukm. So, visiting one day with Dr. Jamal here at IIIT, I expressed a desire to look through the IIIT holdings of Egyptian journals, especially Al-Manar, dating back to the days of Abdurrazik. Dr. Jamal was surprised at the request, chided me for wasting my time. I'm such a clearly wrong-headed fellow. Called your father to talk to him about this, but then acquiesced. Sadly, by the time the article appeared, Dr. Jamal was struggling so with the terrible sickness that eventually took him from our presence that I never gave him a copy of it. What a pity, for it would have been most instructive to hear his reflections on it and to learn more about his reservations concerning, in my view, that learned Egyptian judge. Now, those remarks are intended as a preface to speaking about Dr. Jamal's activities with respect to publications. In addition to the work that he's done with the American Journal of Islamic Social Sciences and the books published by IIIT, Dr. Jamal gained greater public awareness for IIIT, as well as a more positive appreciation for Islam and Muslims. He did so by interacting with Prince Al-Walid bin Talal in the funding and shaping of university centers in the US and UK for the study of Islam. Moreover, he enlarged the scope of the Iftar celebration held here at the Herndon IIIT Center each Ramadan, so that it reaches out to the educational, political, and religious leaders in the larger community and provides them first-hand contact with their Muslim counterparts. Dr. Jamal initiated the Al-Walid project by convening, and what follows is paradigmatic for Dr. Jamal, by convening a group of 35 or so people here in this room, educators and practitioners. It was for an afternoon seminar. The goal was to identify means of increasing awareness of Islam in universities and colleges. A week or so later, two of the participants, educators, were invited back to meet with Dr. Jamal and a colleague of his, Dr. Iqbal. The two academics, both PhDs in political science from the University of Chicago, had studied with Mohsen Mahdi. Neither one was Muslim. After further discussions, a list of institutions that might qualify for funding was drawn up. About 35 such institutions. Each team member selected a few institutions with a view to learning more about them and trying to determine whether a site visit by two or more of the team was reasonable. In making the decisions whether to visit or not, there were no presuppositions, or perhaps more accurately stated, no voiced presuppositions. The visiting teams, after a little bit of discussion, turned out to be one practitioner and one educator, which meant, because of the composition, one Muslim and one non-Muslim. There was no prior agenda for the visits, no behind-the-scenes plotting. The only thing that took place was discussion about what one had seen afterwards. An anecdote to exemplify this is appropriate. Dr. Jamal and I both visited a very prestigious Eastern Coast University, the law school of that university. It so happened that the room we were ushered into in the dean's office had in the leaded windows the names of former deans of the law school. By chance, I was seated across from the name of a man whom I think very highly of with respect to higher education, Robert Hutchins. And so it looked to me like if the dean had been doing his homework, that was very appropriate, because Robert Hutchins had left this university as dean of the law school to go on and become the president of the University of Chicago. And as many of you know, the founder of the Great Books program, especially in the United States. But then the dean happened to mention some of his opinions about what we were doing, and how his group of advisors especially included a rather well-known, hostile reporter from the New York Times. Names will not be mentioned. And then went on to explain what he, the dean, thought the school could do for this grant. Again, in leaving, a short discussion, nothing ad hominem, nothing against the man, either the dean or the reporter, but it was clear from the discussion that was raised that this was not a contender. Well, you know who the contenders came out to, who the winners came out to be. The El-Walid Center for Christian-Muslim Understanding, for Muslim-Christian Understanding at Georgetown University, and the program that Abu Bakr spoke earlier about at Harvard University. When it came time to make a list of those who would be funded, again, engineer Jamal came to the fore. We met in a classroom, and Jamal put up on the blackboard a kind of outline whereby there would be entries into categories, the names of the institutions and criteria by which they would be judged. This was perfect, because had we sat around and tried to discuss our opinions, we would have been there all day and probably into the night. But as it was, one had to quantify in a way that would persuade others what one's impressions were. There's another thing that's quite important about Dr. Jamal and his other kinds of publications. Coming to grips with the 9/11 backlash. I certainly don't need to tell any of you what a terrible ordeal it was. Many of you have lived through it. I hope no longer do. Dr. Jamal always expressed quiet concern in a very dignified manner. As you know, the most wretched part of it recently was his not being able to fly when he was seeking medical aid to Indiana until somebody finally came to their senses. There was a gentle, almost comprehending acceptance of United States government overreach. And at one iftar, many of us in the audience were very surprised to hear him speak about the many gifts that Muslims had in the United States for freedom of expression. At one point, one was tempted to wonder if the speech was intended for the obvious microphones that had been secreted in the building. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was a heartfelt statement. Here is a man speaking about the freedoms hindered after 9/11, to be sure. Speaking about the freedoms that one can have here. As compared, to example, for what one grew up with in Iraq in his days, or in any other country in the region. And then, before coming to books, I'd just like to say a few words about what I would call widening the circle, and Dr. Jamal's attempts to see what one could do about the American Journal for Islamic Social Sciences. IIIT is active the world over. It's therefore been obliged to adopt standards accepted everywhere. Standards based solely on merit. As Dr. Jamal and I came to know each other and came to speak about things that I knew a little bit better because of having spent my life in academia, we tried to figure out what could be done to make standards that had been adopted at the beginning come more into play with the standards that prevailed in academic circles. For all of us That's a learning curve. We begin to become exposed to it as students. We later put it into practice, hopefully, as teachers or as practitioners. And it was always a joy for me and a privilege to see the way Dr. Jamal anticipated these things and saw a way to introduce them slowly into the journal and then into other situations. So for him, finding people able to do this, willing to accept change, to move the journal along, was always a preoccupation. It was one that he pondered and acted upon. Now, what about publications? Many of us have resentments, especially Muslims who've grown up under the pressure of either their own government or the prejudices that exist in the West. They've been, I'm just going to speak in the third person for a moment. Arabs and Muslims have suffered from prejudice. They've been unjustly treated, both at home and abroad. That is a simple fact. Sometimes that resentment finds expression in otherwise scholarly presentations. How can that be limited, excised, softened, so that the argument is made without unnecessarily angering the audience? Or take another very important example. Empathy for the sufferings of Palestinians, at home and abroad. Again, truth must be spoken about the situation, but if something is to change because of it being spoken, a voice that's persuasive is needed. And so there was a constant attempt to try and find that. How to express these issues. That's what careful editing is all about. It allows for the wrong to be identified without having the resentment weaken the claim. So let me close with this picture, what to do. Dr. Jamal sought a friendly editor, one who understood the issues as well as the voice needed to make the argument win support. On the occasions when I had the privilege to serve in such a role, you would see Dr. Jamal, the jacket removed, sleeves rolled up, sit down with the manuscript and go over page by page, correction suggested by the editor, by correction suggested, and try to find out whether that was necessary to be changed or to be excised, and if so, how. Never, to my knowledge, has such care been taken for publications as that. There is somebody in the United States who's been at a number of different presses, beginning with Princeton and now at Rochester Press, who is every bit that kind of an editor. That's the only other person I can think of. And this person comes nowhere near to Jamal Barzinji. It's been a privilege to know him and to have learned with him about the world. Thank you very much.